Hello, good morning, everyone. Today I have the great pleasure to have an interview with Professor Juan Carlos Carracedo. And Juan Carlos is there on the other end. Good morning.
Good morning.
And it's great to have you, Juan Carlos. And I'm going to say a few words about you, and then we can go through the questions that I had prepared. And first of all, well, Juan Carlos Carracedo is emeritus professor of volcanology at the University of Las Palmas, the Gran Canaria. And he graduated from the university in Madrid, in Spain, in 1968. And he received his PhD in 1976 at the same institute. And then he visited the University of Toronto, and he took up a permanent position at the Spanish Research Council, the CISIC, after that visit to Toronto. And then he's been working in Madrid at the National Museum for some time. And then he moved to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, where he was in charge of the Estación Volcanológica de Canarias. And he has been doing this since the 1980s. And in 2011, he retired from the CISIC as a distinguished research professor, which is the highest degree you can achieve in CISIC. And Professor Carracedo was also named one of the most influential scientists in Spain in the national survey in 2015. And in recognition of that, he was appointed a member of the Royal Canary Academy of Sciences in summer 2015. Wow, Juan Carlos, what a career! So I'm really impressed.
That means that I am really an old chap.
Oh, I don't think so. You're really going strong, I think. So, well, Professor Carracedo, I wrote here, has worked in the Canary Islands for over 40 years, published over 200 scientific articles in geology, paleomagnetism, and volcanology, and about the Canary archipelago as a whole, has co-authored or authored over 20 books and book chapters. And one of your key interests is to spark interest in the volcanic origin of the islands, and also to raise awareness of the volcanic phenomena and hazards there, which is of course very important in the Canary Islands, where there is active volcanism. And in fact, you have seen some active volcanism in your time. And this is very important to raise awareness and prepare the population to handle future volcanic crises. So this is kind of the little introduction I had prepared. And then if you're ready for this, I think we can go into some tough questions. Does that sound okay for you?
Okay.
Great, wonderful. So the first question I have here is, the Canary Islands are one of the most beautiful regions in Europe, and they host millions of tourists every year. In fact, the island's economy has become very strongly dependent on tourism by now. The recent COVID pandemic is, of course, a little bit of an issue here, and it had profound effects on our ability to travel long distances. Can you say a word or two about how COVID has affected the Canary Islands and its economy right now?
Well, the effect of this COVID virus in the Canary Island has been devastating. And the problem, this is a structural problem of the economy of these islands, is that they tend continuously to monoculture.
Okay.
It was wine, then was sugarcane, then was bananas. But imagine that in the early 60s of the last century, the population of the Canary Island was a quarter of what it is today.
Yes.
And they live almost exclusively of agriculture and fishery.
Okay.
Then in the 60s, the flights become more frequent to the Canary Islands. They built very nice airports, flights were cheap, and mass tourism started. And then they focus on this monoculture, so that today the island depends almost exclusively for employment and for money of this industry of the mass tourism. So when something like this pandemic comes, of course, depends on how long, on what are the effects, but could be absolutely devastating for the economy of the island that is totally dependent on this monoculture that is mass tourism.
This is very serious, of course. And yeah, no, I realize that the strong dependence can be economically really, really beneficial once everything goes well. But
yeah, of course, but because now the population of the island is more than 2 million. But this population cannot be sustained without the input that the mass tourism afford to the island. So if this for some problem disappear, the population of the island cannot stay here, so have to migrate. So let's not be pessimistic.
Yes,
but in
I see
some way,
that.
we say in Spanish to put all the eggs in the same basket.
Yes, this is a very good expression.
The authorities should start thinking of a diversification of the money they get from this monoculture to prepare for other possibilities of money from other sources that is not the tourism. Yeah.
I see. No, this makes a lot of sense that you need to use the good times in order to prepare for the not so good times, and you need to have the profit, the income that you make in good times to actually diversify, so that if one of these income streams, the strongest one in that fact, falls flat, that you still can actually survive. And I see if this goes on for longer, another 6 months or a year or so, then I think the economy might be really, really troubled. Well, thank you for that.
Sorry, Val, let me say that this is very difficult to reverse. But because, for instance, nowadays, the water that they were using for the agriculture is now used, of course, for the tourism. Yeah. Because they need water to get baths, etc. So, and also the best, how you say, crop land to be cultivated are now occupied by this mass urbanization, hotels, etc.
Yes.
So if you have to revert this, it will be very, very difficult.
Yes, I can see that. I mean, making it back into agricultural land is going to be super challenging, and of course, it's also very different. I mean, there's a lot of pressure for agricultural production, and the Canary had a bit of a sweet spot, a little bit of a niche, because they are so lovely, so nice as a tourist area. While when it comes to growing bananas, there's a lot of other areas that grow bananas. Iceland grows bananas now because of the geothermal energy. So it's very hard to compete with that.
And also the banana crop is a tropical fruit, so you need a lot of water.
Absolutely, yes.
And the best lowlands in the islands that are also very good for tourism. So this is a competition. So the bananas are no more profitable for the economy of the Canary Islands.
Yes, and this was not on my question sheet, but we can maybe talk for a minute about that. The water table is a huge problem. You mentioned it. Because of the tourism, the aquifers inside the islands have been falling. So I think a lot of the water that is currently used.
4.5 centimeters.
Per year, that is.
Exactly.
Wow, I mean, this is huge, because I mean, and of course it's not replenished at this rate. I mean, there's not so much rainfall. It's not that you're using old water, fossil water. And this is of course a huge problem. So, but if tourism continues, the water table will be depleted further. What's the long-term answer? Where do we get the water from?
Building desalination plant.
I think that's the only reasonable one, because I know that.
But they have already done that.
Yeah, I know there's some efforts
to substitute the natural groundwater by this desalination of the ocean water.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But this is very expensive. This is very expensive. So
yes, it costs a lot of electricity.
I am not an economist, I am poor geologist.
No, this is a huge thing. And shipping in water, as it's sometimes done with large ocean tankers, I think that's not an option either. It costs huge amounts of fossil fuel and you have to desalinate, but that costs electricity, of course. But that's a slightly different topic and it's beyond our kind of question set today. But hopefully that wind power can be used and solar power can be used to do some of this. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the national parks with you because they are one of the main attractions for geotourism, of course. And you live on Tenerife and to my mind, it's one of the nicest islands I've ever visited in my life. And there's Tayden volcano in the center of Tenerife. And there is Tayden National Park. And it's one of the most popular in all of Spain. And it's a key attraction in the Canary Islands. It's one of the largest national parks in Europe. And it's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it hosts more than 4 million visitors per year. Can you say a few words about what is so special about Tayden National Park? Because I know you were involved in applying for the UNESCO status, and you've been working a lot in the national park and on the rocks there and the geology. So you're really the person to ask. What is so special about Tayden National Park?
Well, let me first say that I am very fortunate because I have the Tayden just...
You have it around the corner, yes.
And also it's about 1 hour and a half or less by car to get to the foot of Tayden. Tayden is a very, very important. It was important for the Guanche people, that was the Aborigine people here in the Canary Islands, that they call this volcano Tayden, which means Echeide in the primitive language, means infierno, hell.
Okay.
Because they were very, very scared of this volcano. Because actually during the living span of the Guanche people before the Spanish came here in 1400.
In the 15th century, 1470s, 1480s.
The activity in Tayden was very, very intense. There were many volcanic eruptions. Well, actually in the Tayden and in the volcanoes around the Tayden. So actually they were very scared of this volcano.
Yes.
It is interesting. Well, it's the highest altitude in Spain, and also in Europe, almost in Europe. Not, but if we consider that when we get to the coast, we are not in the foot of the islands. The islands continues to the bottom of the ocean 4 kilometers more. So in total, the structure of the island is almost 8 kilometers. So yes. It's the second highest volcanic feature in the world, only after the Mauna Loa in the Hawaiian Islands. Wow. And I like always to compare the Canaries with the Hawaiian Islands. The Canary Islands are for Europe what the Hawaiian Islands are for Asia, Japan, and even Australia. When you go to Japan,
that's true.
Apart from the Americans, you get a lot of Japanese, Chinese, and Australian visiting the islands. So to any comparison is I like to establish between the Canary Islands and the Hawaiian Islands. And they are similar in origin because the origin of this oceanic island that are in the middle of a tectonic plate is because a plume of magma managed to rise and come and form a hot spot. That means a lot of volcanic islands forming an oceanic archipelago. But these are the common points between the Canary and the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay.
But there are very important differences. The Hawaiian Islands are very young relatively. The oldest island in the Hawaiian archipelago is Kauai, is only 6 million years. In the Canary Islands, Fuerteventura have more than 24 million years old rocks.
Okay.
Also, from the landscape, from the obvious observation for any person, the Hawaiian Islands are tropical, are lush vegetation, are covered with vegetation, whereas in the Canary Islands, it's a lot of diversity. You get also very green islands like La Palma, which is covered with forest and lush vegetation, but then you get some islands like Fuerteventura, which is a desert. The water that falls in the Fuerteventura is similar to the Saharan desert.
Yes, it's very dry indeed. It's the same
Absolutely
climate zone. Yes.
Less than 200 millimeters per year. And that means that also because the archipelago is so old, the erosion has dismantled these eastern islands. So you get Lanzarote and Fuerteventura, you get these very flat islands, very dry, and with very nice beaches. Whereas in the other side of the archipelago, you get very abrupt islands with a rough topography and very nice vegetation. So in one place it's very adequate for having sun in the beaches, and in the other is to trekking in very
the
nice
mountains. Yes. No, this is wonderful. This sounds great. And so, indeed, Tayden is somewhere in the middle. Tenerife is right in the middle of the archipelago. So you have beaches as well as topography. And
exactly.
This is beautiful.
Because actually Tenerife is in the middle of the archipelago and in the middle of the time evolution of the archipelago. So have both components. But you asked me about the Tayden National Park and the Hawaiian Volcanoes National Park. The Hawaiian Volcano National Park was the first to be included in the World Heritage List.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful place. I have been a couple of times there, and it's absolutely fantastic. So they said, well, why we have to put another similar national park, volcanic, if we have already the Hawaiian Volcano National Park, which is enough, because the World Heritage List try to avoid repetition of similar features.
Yes,
similar
sites.
And they asked me, and fortunately I gave them an argument that they couldn't refuse. Because, you know, because of the islands, the Canary Islands so old, magma doesn't have time enough to differentiate and to change to another type of magmas, more felsic, more explosive. Okay. When they erupt, they give completely different structure, forms, and products. So the Tayden National Park is not competing with the Hawaiian National Park. It's a complement. So both national parks are a very beautiful and unique example of both basaltic and felsic volcanoes. And in fact, they finally accepted, and now the Tayden National Park is also in the World Heritage list.
This is fantastic.
For instance, in Tayden, in the national park, you have pumice.
Yes.
All the products that are typical of these felsic volcanoes. And in the Hawaiian Volcanoes National Park is very nice with all type of basaltic eruption, even I say going on at present, but they don't have the features that you can find beautifully in the Tayden National Park.
That's fantastic. I was just about to add that the Hawaiian National Park, the rocks are mainly black and basaltic, as you say. And in the Tayden kind of central part of Tenerife, the rocks are quite light colored. There's felsic. There's a difference in the chemical composition.
Exactly, but for instance, one of the main features in the Tayden is a mountain, a small cinder cone that, well, among a small volcano that is at the foot of Tayden that is called Montaña Blanca. That means white mountain, precisely because it's covered with pumice.
And that makes it very distinct from Hawaii. Hawaii has no such felsic high silica compositions, but Tenerife has quite a lot of them. And actually in the geological history that predates Tayden, there was a lot of felsic, high silica eruptions by comparison, of course.
It was a very big volcano, felsic, that have, because actually, fortunately, the Canary Islands, for instance, Tenerife now is a very quiet volcanically speaking, but has not been similar in the past. Let's say that 200,000 years ago, there were horrific eruption in the Tayden, in the top of the island of Tenerife, Plinian eruption that devastated several times the entire island. It was impossible to live in those days. That's something that never happened in the Hawaiian Islands. To have Plinian eruption similar to Pinatubo or Nevado del Ruiz or Etna, etc. And this, what I mean is that this volcano that was, let's say, a little less than the present Tayden, collapsed in a giant landslide that make a caldera, the caldera de las Cañadas, and the Tayden grew nested inside this caldera. So it's a very complex and very interesting feature that developed in the last 200,000 years.
And I can actually see in the map behind you that we can see the scar of the Las Cañadas caldera.
Yes, yes.
And yes, there it is. And the colors there are the young eruptive products, younger than 200,000 years. And you can see that they're only on one side of the island, not on the other side, because of this collapse. But well, praise the Lord, we have no such eruptions in the near future, at least no expected ones. Otherwise, tourism would be quite impossible on the island, I think.
Well, let me say this clearly, Val. In the historic times, that means after the Spanish came here to the islands, all the eruption, and we have 17, all have been very, can I say, quiet, because they are a strombolian eruption that they are not very dangerous for the people. In fact, no one single human victim has been related to this historic eruption. And geology don't change sharply.
No, the behavior is
so
very
we can expect that this continue at least in our lifetime.
Well, I
so
hope
tourism can come here because it's not a dangerous place. We have no big earthquakes like there are actually in the Hawaiian Islands. They have earthquakes up to 7 in the Richter scale. Here, the highest earthquake has been 5.2 in the Richter scale. And usually there are microseismicity that is not even noticed by the population. Also here in the Canaries, there are no typhoons, or how you say, like in Hawaii. So in the long, and the eruption in Hawaii are almost continuous. So in the long run, the Canary Islands are even more easygoing for people, for tourists, than the Hawaiian Island, which is the paradisiac islands in
Hawaii. Yes. Now, this sounds very good, and this is something to stress because there has been historical eruptions in 1705, in 1706, in 1798. There was the most recent one was in 1909, and there was no fatalities. So this is very important. And these strombolian eruptions, they make beautiful fire fountains of a few tens to maybe 100 meter high or so. They're spectacular to watch, but if you don't run into the fire fountain, you're pretty safe. And of course, there's some lava flow. There was structural damage, like in 1705, 1706, there was the Carracedo event where the lavas were destroying a port. But of course, people realized that the lava was coming, so there was no kind of serious danger to the population. And that's good to know.
This 1706 eruption actually was a very mean eruption because pointed to the most important infrastructure of the island at the moment. That was the Carracedo port in a embayment, a small embayment. but all the traffic from America, and also to mostly to England, to bring the wine of Tenerife to England. It was destroyed in a few hours.
Oh,
but
I see.
Not for the people, not fatalities, but the port was absolutely devastated. So to change the port to Santa Cruz. So all the infrastructure and all the commerce of the island changes because of a small eruption that only lasts a few days.
And Santa Cruz is as far away as you can get on Tenerife from
and
the
it's in the
active
other side of
volcano.
there.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly.
Great, let's continue. And we touched on several of the things already, but the next question on my list here is what are the challenges when aiming to sustain modern day mass tourism while trying to preserve the abiotic and also biotic and cultural values of Tenerife and the Tayden National Park? It's quite challenging to balance all these things. And we touched on water earlier, which is one of these issues, but can you maybe say a few more words about that? How can we achieve a balance there? How can we make sure that by pushing one goal, we are not neglecting some of the other features, that we're not sacrificing one thing for the other? Or do you think it's impossible and we will have to, something has to give way? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I mentioned already that it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to reverse the environmental damage that has already been done. But there is a hope that they say that you only care about what you know, and you only and the Canary Islands are not well known for the general people, the general visitors that came here mostly to lay in the sun in the beach. But there are such an amount of interesting features, not only geology from the geological point of view, but also botanical, landscape, etc., that this can be promoted for the general people to know. And when they become aware of how beautiful are the islands, maybe they started, instead of destroying things, to care about, and also force the authority to be more responsible for the environmental care of the islands. I don't know if I have expressed myself.
No, I think that you're right. This is very important. And I think the Tayden National Park is making a real effort. And that leads me on to the next question, because there's a little bit of a difference there. The Tayden National Park is rather flexible. There's rangers, and a few years ago, I was walking off some of the hiking paths, and within half an hour, one of the rangers kind of caught me and reminded me that I'm not supposed to go there. I explained that I have permits and that I'm a researcher and all was fine, but they really checked on that, and that was very good. But here's the other example, and this is right the next question. Another very important national park in the Canary Islands is the one on Lanzarote, the Timon National Park, which is round about the vent sites, the volcanic vents of the 1730 to 36 eruption. And there you cannot really walk around freely. So what I've written here is that criticism has been voiced that the accessibility to that national park is really limited. And there's a visitor center, there's a coach tour that takes you around, but there's also some activities. They would demonstrate some things. They have some hot steaming there, and they would put some straw on the hot steams and it starts to flame up, so you can watch that. And in the visitor center, you can have volcanically kind of barbecued chicken and things like that. But many tourists have complained, certainly in the online reports and reviews, that it's feeling a bit like a money-making exercise. There's an entrance fee of 10 euros by now, and Tayden National Park has no entrance fees. There's a lot of hiking path. There's a lot of roads. You can drive in there yourself. And then in Timon, the waiting lines are very long, and people have been very critical. And in fact, this is reflected in some of the behaviors, because it seems that Tayden National Park is now with COVID, it's different, but it has been increasing its visitor numbers over the last few years. So how do you feel about this restriction? Because we need to watch that people are not destroying the landscape and not interfering with the biotic environment there, because there's rare plants in these national parks that grow on volcanic soil. But on the same token, people want to have the freedom of walking around, of hiking, of doing all sorts of outdoor activities. How do you feel about these two extremes, the Timon Fire versus the Tayden National Park, one being really restricted and the other one being rather more open?
Yeah, well, I think there are two opposite strategies to get the best economically from the natural resources of the two islands. And I think, I'm very sorry to say that maybe in Lanzarote they went too far. And this started in the 60s, because there was a famous painter, César Manrique, that was very influential in the island and convinced the local authorities to preserve the resources of the island in a very peculiar way. That was to make an entrance, an only entrance to the sites, and put a barrier and ask for money to get inside. And they did that in all the most interesting geological sites of the island. Not only in the geological sites, for instance, the Montañas del Fuego, where the lava tube of Los Jameos in the Corona volcano, but also the castle, one big castle of the island. Everything you have to pay. And this is a way to get money for the local. But the other way is, I think, is a more intelligent strategy, is the one in the Tayden National Park in the island of Tenerife, that contemplates all the resources as the main resource of the entire island to attract visitors. So they don't get money from an entrance that is not nice for the people that visit the place, but they get money from the visitors, from the hotels, from the bars, from the beers, etc. From many, and that's the main difference. Actually, it's very funny, because they think that, for instance, the Montañas del Fuego, they thought that was the initial vent of the 1730-36 eruption. And so they destroyed a cinder cone that was closed to get the lapilli to make the road. And this cinder cone was actually a 1824 cinder cone that was also very interesting. And also destroyed, well, get the lapilli of another vent that was actually the initial vent of the 1730 erosion, that is almost 3 kilometers away from the place where they built a big bar, because there is a dry anomaly. They put a bucket of water, wait a few seconds, and make an artificial geyser. And this is the main attraction. And they bring people, they get the money, they put the people in a pass, and they make a circuit, and they say goodbye, and that's all. So I think, I don't know if this answered what you...
No, I think this is a valid point. I hadn't considered this, and that is that in order to make the visitor center and to constrain the area this way so that nobody can, excuse me, go in without not paying, you actually need to build things. And if they use the local kind of rock for doing that, they will actually, with a lack of understanding, potentially destroy some of those things they hope to protect. And this is a bit disturbing, a bit disconcerting, I have to say. And of course, it's also, as you say, not nice for the people, because I remember that the two of us visited a few years ago, and it's nice to see this geyser coming up when they put water on the hot fumarole. But on the other side, you feel a bit like, I don't know, a sheep in a large kind of group. And
a thematic park, I would say.
It's almost a theme park rather than a national park or a nature park. And this is a little different. And intriguingly, indeed, I looked up some numbers here. Intriguingly, the visitors to the Timon Fire Park actually have declined from 3.2 million in 2012 to about 2.7 million in 2016. I couldn't find very recent data. 2016 is sufficiently recent for this comparison. In the same time, the Tayden National Park had recorded the highest numbers of visitors ever in 2016 with 4.3 million people, making it the most popular national park in Spain. So indeed, I guess my question is one of them a better strategy, and is one of them a winning kind of concept? And I guess you answered it already. The Tayden National Park concept seems to be better because you don't build very much there, you don't destroy many of the features, and you give people a bit more freedom there to exploit that and enjoy nature. But at the same time, they will spend money on hiring bicycles and paying for sports gear that they rent, and of course they will have to eat and sleep somewhere, so they leave money on the island in hotels and in bars, as you say, and buying souvenirs and things like that, rather than squeezing the money out of the tourists with entrance fees, which will probably decline budgets for other things. So other parts of the island will not see quite as much income. So I guess you answered that question already, but yeah, no, I personally also like the Tayden National Park a lot better than that one at Lanzarote, and no offense to Lanzarote's kind of strategy, but I think there's a huge difference.
But also think, for instance, in the Hawaiian National Park, in the Big Island. There you pay an entrance, but then you go with your car and you go for the roads and you are free. But imagine there are lava flows that are actually flowing, red hot lava. And I ask, you don't think that this is dangerous for the people? And they say, people have to use his common sense.
Yes.
So they are grown man people, and they are American, and this is American land, and so they have a right to visit wherever they want. This is the philosophy. And then, of course, your money is left in the hotels and in all the facilities that you get in the Big Island.
I see,
so
I see.
That's
yeah.
kind of strategy that I think that's probably the answer of what you said, that the tourism in the national park is increasing, whereas in the Lanzarote, this thematic park is a little boring for the people and is going down.
That's at least the numbers I found. The numbers are the numbers. I mean, they are from research publications, so people have looked into that. And as I said, I haven't checked the most recent numbers for 2018 and 19, but the ones from 2012 to 2016 were quite opposing, actually. Tayden National Park was having increasing visitors, and actually the highest ones in 2016 ever. And in Lanzarote, it was going down a little. And if you look at the online reviews, people are expressing that they feel it's a bit expensive, that they feel that it's hurting, i.e. that large groups of people have to flock together to watch these theme park events rather than being free to roam at their own kind of will and own leisure. But this brings me on to something very, very different, and that is, we've discussed the two large national parks on Lanzarote and on Tenerife, but there, because of the Canaries being an active volcanic archipelago, there's also some of the small islands, and some of them have been affected in historical times by eruptions as well. And this brings me on to the case of El Hierro. I call it the peculiar case of El Hierro. There, it's a small island, and with a small population, only a very limited population lives there. And this was very famous for a very nature-based tourism, kind of an ecotourism. And of course, there's some agriculture, but most of the tourism was really kind of a bit more alternative, a bit more nature-based. But then there was this submarine eruptions a little offshore, not very distant from the shore, but something like 2 kilometers out from the southern coast. And this was in 2011 and 2012. And to my understanding, tourism kind of collapsed during and after this event, and it hasn't really recovered ever since then. What's the story there? What was happening there? Can you say a few words about that?
Well, I don't want to be too critical, but I would say that maybe they didn't manage the eruption as they could. Actually, the La Restinga eruption was a submarine vent, as you said, 2 kilometers from this port village of La Restinga. And actually, the volcano never rise above the surface of the water. So it was not even at 8 meters below the surface. That is the critical limit to be able to be explosive.
Okay.
Danger. And also, so if they have monitor the growth of the vent approaching the surface of the water, maybe they could have avoid to evacuation of the town, of the village, that made all this fuss about the eruption. Also, they avoid to get advice from many, not many, but a few, maybe 10 or 12 foreign scientists that have experience, and they were a debate, a critical debate, because in this eruption, bombs, volcanic bombs that of basaltic aspect in the surface, black lava, but when inside these lava bombs, there were a white material that in a too fast, too quick analysis, they said that there was a rhyolitic in composition, so the magma was very explosive, and this could be a big explosive volcano. So again, they evacuate the village of La Restinga. Actually, and you precisely were responsible for that. Actually, that was not rhyolitic magma. That was sand from the bottom of the ocean that was engulfed in this lava because they are immiscible. And so these lava bombs, this volcanic bomb, brought ocean sediments to the surface, and that's why they were white stuff. And so that didn't mean any danger for this volcano. And yes, the consequence of this wrong management, at least in hindsight, we can say that if they have brought up an oceanic vessel to monitor the growth of the volcano, and they have assessed at least to discuss the procedure, the origin of this white stuff in the volcanic bombs, maybe they could have avoided the alarm that was, even from mainland Spain, they brought a military corps to install, how you say, tents for the people to evacuate the people. So it was an alarm that could have been avoided, at least in part, and avoid also the economic crisis that followed in the following years in the island of Lanzarote, that, as you said, is very small. The population is very scarce, a few thousands, and they have a growing tourism that at that moment, at least for the following years, was how you say, was critical.
Yes, it went down quite dramatically, and it's an interesting.
And that means that it's important in the management of this eruption to have as much information as possible instead of making closed shop or whatever you say in English. So yeah, to avoid another people even to get samples. I remember I have been working for years, tens of years in the island of El Hierro. I made the general map of the island, etc. And they didn't allow me to express my opinion and even to get samples to follow studies of this erosion. So that's not.
That was a very strange time. I remember that. And indeed, as you say, they brought in something like, I recall, 2,000 army personnel to evacuate this village of 500. And they were, of course, reacting very strongly to this. To be fair, it was right the year after the big Eyjafjallajökull event, and they may have been very worried. But then, of course, the other problem was that these felsic lumps, these bombs that you described, they turned out to have the wrong minerals, and they turned out to have fossils. But the initial response was, oh, they are high silica and they could be rhyolite. And people got so scared. I guess there was, how to put this now, there was a bit of an overreaction there. And I think this puts people off. I mean, tourists don't want to be near exploding volcanoes. They want to be near calm volcanoes. And this brings me on to my next question, because El Hierro in 2011 was so fundamentally different to what happened in 1971. And you were there as well. I was just born that year. I was at the time of the eruption, I was 6 months old and had no idea about volcanoes. But in 1971, a little volcano on La Palma erupted, the Teneguía volcano. And it's located next to a small town of Funcaliente. And the intriguing thing was that tourism actually boomed in the following weeks, months, and years. And the vent site is still actually a little nature reserve, and you can go there and you can hike there. And I've just visited it last year together with National Geographic. They did some filming there. And why was it so different on La Palma? Why did it actually profit the tourism while the El Hierro situation was doing quite the opposite, actually?
Well, it's an interesting story, because we knew about that an erosion was going to occur. That was the professor in Madrid, Professor Fuster, because the CIA, the American intelligence agency,
I love these stories.
they have actually they have hydrophones installed in Puerto Naos, in the west of the island, and to monitor the path of Soviet submarines, because there was the Cold War, and they started to notice signals, very frequent and increasing in frequency and in magnitude in these hydrophones. And of course, was not the entire Soviet fleet of submarines coming. So they
for holiday in the Canaries, maybe, but
so they send these registers to the embassy, to the United States or wherever, and the embassy in Spain of the United States sent this to the University of Madrid, to Foster, that was the Cathedra of Petrology, and immediately he noticed that this was an eruption, an impending eruption. So we came to the La Palma one day after the eruption has already started. And what we saw was a multitude of people on top of a volcano that was half a mile away, just watching the volcano, because that was spectacular, especially by night. And also there was no danger, because the only danger was the volcanic bombs that were ejected, and only about a few hundreds around the volcano. So actually, in the following days, the multitude of the people, the crowd of people on top of the volcano was increasing. So they have to ask for 2 military Guardia Civil to stay around, to to prevent the people to approach the volcano to the dangerous limit of this bomb. And in the following years, the Teneguía volcano was an icon for the island, for the tourism, for the wine, for the restaurant, for everything they put in the restaurant cards. Teneguía tortilla, etc. You know what I mean? So
there was even a stamp, I remember.
Absolutely, a profit in the following years, and still in La Palma, the Teneguía eruption is an economical resource that they know how to use. So this is
that's excellent.
And that was in 71, and El Hierro was in 2011. So that means that in modern times, because of personal interest and all, and political, etc., you can manage an eruption not as well as it was in this time. And the problem is, you have to be honest to say that in the eruption of El Hierro, the monitoring, the seismic network installed by the Instituto Geográfico, the Geographic Institute of Spain, was very good, and they monitored the seismic activity, and they knew where the volcano was and where the evolution of the volcano. So actually mainly was the white stuff in the volcanic bomb that are generally known as restingolites because of la restinga. That was the problem, to start talking about a potentially very dangerous explosive volcano because of this rhyolitic magma that never exists.
Yes, I remember that very well, because I remember that we had inspected this material. Somebody kind of sent some material to us, and we had pointed out that this was very similar to what has been found on some of the other islands like Gran Canaria, and this was, to our assessment at the time, that this was just melted sediment rather than a very explosive magma. But I think the political situation was like that they were so worried about things and so overexcited about the possible hazards that this reaction was very strong. But to be fair, and to also look at the dark side of the 1971 events, there has been 2 fatalities in 1971 on La Palma, while in the El Hierro event, of course it was offshore, it wasn't even on land, but there has been no fatalities. It was a disaster for the fishing grounds in 2011 and 2012. So the economy was also suffering, not just because of tourism, but also because the fishing grounds were suffering. But there was no fatalities from the eruption. But the 2 fatalities in 1971, they were both rather strange cases. Can you quickly remind me about that?
Yeah, well, depends on what you call fatalities. Because fatalities, we understand fatalities are people that are killed by a volcano without any action of the people. So you are in your house and a bomb falls on top of you and kills you. This is a fatality. But these people were, how you say, working fatalities. One was a photographer that went very close to the volcano down in the coast, and he was asphyxiated because there was no poisonous gas, but there was a lot of CO2 that is heavier than the air, so he couldn't breathe and get asphyxiated. The same for another fisherman that saw a lot of fish floating in the sea, and he started to pick the fish and also get asphyxiated. And almost there could have been 2 more fatalities. Myself and another geologist, we came down with a Land Rover down to a track that is in the bottom of the volcano, in the coast, in the same place that these people were killed. And we have a mask, gas mask. And we were silly because we didn't understood at the moment that there was not poisonous gases you have to care about, but the lack of oxygen because the CO2.
The CO2 is the problem, yes.
And we started to feel like a ring in the head, a tremendous headache. And we managed, because the car was a diesel car, we managed to turn and get out. But if we have continued a few tenths of meter, maybe we have been killed, asphyxiated too. So, and we were not victims, we were stupid.
But this is also interesting because this brings me back, it rings a bell with the recent White Island disaster in New Zealand, which was a strange event because it was, to my understanding, to a certain degree, it was the companies that allowed tourists or brought tourists there was a willingness to kind of accept the risk in order to make a financial gain. And it sounds a bit like that in '71, the fishermen who wanted to have an extra large catch because of the fish floating around, and the photographer wanting to have spectacular pictures, I assume, but they actually brought themselves into extra danger. And that, of course, is a somewhat strange thing. So we need to watch this phenomenon, I think, also in future events, that we don't have people going into these extremely dangerous situations, but we need to find a balance, I believe, that we can have, you know, people experiencing these natural phenomena and not closing off entire parts of islands with large amounts of soldiers that are actually not even reaching any part of the island as an eruptive phenomena. So this balance is what strikes me as the important thing. And this brings me on to, excuse me, to my last kind of little question, which is really, so we've now looked at the '71 and 2011 events on La Palma and El Hierro, respectively. We also looked at COVID a little bit. We looked at the national parks of Tayden and of Timanfaya on Tenerife and Lanzarote. And so looking at all these things, how would you see the future of nature tourism and volcano tourism in the Canary Islands? What are the key ingredients that we need to watch out for in order to make this successful, while at the same time not being too tremendously, dreadfully dangerous for destroying nature and the ecosystems?
That's a very difficult
I know.
question. Well, I think, let's say first that the great majority of tourism that come actually to the Canary Islands, let's say to Fuerteventura, to Gran Canaria, to Tenerife, or Lanzarote, they come to rest on the beach, have plenty of sun, and a couple of beers.
I guess that's very attractive, yeah.
So only a fraction of this, which is can be an interesting fraction of this, are also interested in going to visit the geological sites. So, for instance, in Tayden, that is 4 million out of 15 million that visit the Canary Islands every year. We don't know
about
now.
1/3 of people who actually go to the national park from all the visitors.
Exactly.
Yes.
So possibly the best idea is to increase the knowledge of the foreign visitors of the other places that can visit apart from resting and relax in the beach, you know, to promote the best natural resources of the island, the geosites, and also the forests, and also the archaeological, etc., so that the cultural aspect can also be an important part of the visit of the islands. I think this is because if you go too
make
far,
it a rounded experience. Yes,
you go too far in preventing people to feel a little free when they are visiting these places. I think this is doing the opposite effect that you are trying to, instead of preventing or instead of taking care of the site, what you are doing is that the people are more interested in visiting because they feel that they have no freedom to be enjoying the place.
I see. And of course, the problem then is that if you don't have visitors, you don't have the money. And without the money, you are actually running into the problem that you cannot protect the sites to the same level as if you actually have the resources to have a well catered for national park with the right financial backing to achieve the things you need to do. So this is the dilemma there. But no, I think you're right. Personally, I think you're right. A certain element of freedom is important, and that will create the revenue that allows to actually keep these systems running. And a balance needs to be struck between, you know, people access and mass tourism, but at the same time, there has to be the experience the individual can have about linking with nature in a John Muir type national park sense, that you actually link with nature and have your own kind of interaction with it on an emotional and physical level. So
let's say, Val, that this is actually a very complex matter.
Oh, it is, yeah.
For us geologists, it's easier to get a rock and look and see the minerals and say whatever. But this is complicated because a lot of different aspects have to be balanced, as you say. So I only hope that the people, the authorities, manage to get the better advice and to keep the Canary Islands as attractive in the future, at least as they have been before this pandemic hit the island.
Yes, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
And I like very much these islands, and I hope the future is good. Is the best future for these islands.
I hope so too, and I hope that COVID will be over, because I can't wait to come back and enjoy the nature, the beauty, and also the volcanoes. And so, yeah, I have some travel plans for later this year, and I'm just hoping that COVID will allow me to go, but we will have to see. Anyway, I think our time is up. Juan Carlos, it was great talking with you about this. And I say thank you very much for your time, for your insight, your expertise. And this has been great. So I hope that some authorities will listen to what you said today, and that they will find a good balance between protection, but also access. And this is the two things. If one is too strong, things get out of balance, and this is actually more harmful. And hopefully they will get that right. So thank you very much. And I will say goodbye now, and I'll stop our little recording then. And all the very best, Juan Carlos.
All the very best, Val. It was
Thank
nice
you.
to talk to you.
It was a pleasure indeed. Okay, bye-bye.